Welcome to the new sound of online radio. Welcome to the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network. 'Cause you make me feel like I've been locked out of heaven. A mix of today's hits and hard-to-find favorites, combined with the most entertaining and intriguing talk anywhere. This is your sound. This is the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network at UBNradio.com.
You're listening to the Dr. Dee Show about neuropsychology and well-being. Get the knowledge you must have to live a powerful, positive life. The Dr. Dee Show. Here for you.
Welcome, listeners, to the Dr. Dee Show. It is wonderful to have all of you with us. I received a lot of interesting and supportive comments to today's episode. It's very exciting. We're going to touch on a very important topic today. But before that, our usual disclaimers. This show is psychoeducational in essence. It's not meant to replace professional mental health advice or therapy. If you do believe you suffer from a particular disorder, please do reach out to professional help. We are honored to have with us today a doctor that I think is pioneering and bringing forward a very important and essential topic in the area of medicine, mental health, and self-care. Dr. Pamela Wible, welcome to the show. Dr. Wible, are you with us? Okay, looks like we may have lost a connection, so we're going to have her back on with us in a few minutes. Dr. Wible, are you with us?
I am here.
Wonderful. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, with your permission, I'm going to be giving a little review for our listeners about your bio. So, a nice little short of it. Dr. Wible is a family physician born into a family of physicians who warned her not to pursue medicine. Boy, does that sound familiar. She soon discovered why. To heal her patients, she first had to heal her healing profession. Fed up with assembly line medicine, Dr. Wible held town hall meetings where she invited citizens to design their own ideal clinic. Open since 2005, Dr. Wible's community clinic has inspired Americans to create ideal clinics and hospitals nationwide. Her innovative model is now taught in medical schools and featured in Harvard School of Public Health's newest edition. It's Renegotiating Healthcare, a textbook examining major trends with the potential to change the dynamics of healthcare. Dr. Wible speaks widely on healthcare delivery and is the best-selling author of Pet Goats and Pap Smears and Physician Suicide Letters Answered. When not treating patients, Dr. Wible devotes herself to medical students and physician suicide prevention. It is the topic of today. Her articles have been picked up by major news outlets such as the Washington Post, and her work on physician suicide was the focus of a primetime segment on America Tonight and is now picked up by the Dr. Dee Show. Dr. Wible has been interviewed by CNN, ABC, CBS, and she's a frequent guest on NPR. She's an inspiring leader and educator of the next generation of physicians. Dr. Wible has been named one of the 2015 Women Leaders in Medicine, and a TED Med calls her the physician's guardian angel. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's awesome to be here.
Wonderful. And, and it's very exciting and important to me because part of what my listeners know that I do is not be afraid to talk and to bring forward topics that for us in the world of either medicine, psychology, can be hot potatoes. And when we say hot potatoes, the areas that are super important, but they are hot and no one always feels comfortable playing with them or touching them. And the purpose of the show is to bring forward these issues because they are very important. They touch people's lives. And what you're doing is helping open access and reshaping, redesigning the world of individuals who dedicate their life to help others. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and start at the beginning. And could you share with us how did it all start for you?
Well, I was like many pre-med students, very happy, idealistic, humanitarian, hardworking, studious person. And I entered medical school after, like you said, being warned not to by my parents. And I was quickly disenchanted with the entire process. I felt like my training was very barbaric. The first year of medical school, I spent the whole time basically crying myself to sleep when I was not in class. I thought that it was just inhumane in my medical school and in many schools of the day. We were supposed to murder dogs as part of our curriculum and physiology. And I just couldn't believe some of the things, the unethical things that they were having us do, and how dehumanizing the entire fear-based training method was. This patriarchal reductionist medical model is very dehumanizing, I think, for everyone, for patients too.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because often the answer we will receive in the medical world is, well, we're dealing with sometimes such physical horror of individuals, or dealing with the mundane everyday case that we see. And in a way to deal with it emotionally and psychologically is to dehumanize the experience. And that goes in stark contrast to what we know over and over again statistically, that the best doctors are the ones who have a very humane connection with their patients, who know and remember who their patients are, who built a rapport with the patient, and that's above and beyond their clinical expertise or their research knowledge.
Exactly. I mean, in the process of our medical training, we should not be dehumanized and then offered some sort of empathy multiple choice test at the end to try to replace what we've lost. We should be harnessing the best in everyone during their medical education and not injuring people.
And something that many times I think individuals who are not in the medical world or the academic world realize is the intense and unusual culture that you will experience when you are in that world. And you are not prepared for that. No one really tells you that that's how it's going to be. There is no manual to survival in that environment. And you just learn to find yourself in that world. And the ones who are, for all sorts of reasons, the ones who are not willing to put up with that type of treatment, the ones who are not, who are going through something, whether they had a baby or they have a disease, or they come in with predispositions, or they have conflict at home, or they have financial problems. There's so many reasons, human reasons, why a student would be struggling above and beyond maybe another student. And that's not how is the medical, before I say what I think about it, how does the medical community deal with it?
Well, they don't deal with it well at all. It's our way or the highway, and if you stray off the usual trajectory that they want you on in your medical training, then you end up basically being pushed aside because there's so many other people that are grappling for your spot. You know what I mean? So if you can't keep up, with everyone else for whatever reason, then it seems like the medical schools and residencies are happy to throw you under the bus and take somebody else from the bus stop.
That's very true. And now, here's what's, I think, very interesting about this. The devil's advocate would say, well, part of the experience of being a doctor later on is a very stressful experience, having to deal with people's medical problems and analyzing those and dealing with the pressures of all sorts of requirements and restrictions that doctors go through, which, for our listeners' benefit to know, have been intensified significantly in the last 30 years with more and more laws and regulations. Part of that isn't this type of rigorous treatment or cold competitive treatment, isn't that a way of preparing them for what's to come after they graduate?
Well, I mean, that's what some people might say, but I don't think there's any excuse for inhumane treatment and human rights violations in your medical training. And it's certainly like, why should I have to kill a dog, for example, to be a doctor? That makes no sense. You know, that's not an experience that I need to have, so that would make me a really great family physician. You know, I think what we need is to have more empathy, not less, during our training. And there's certain things that we are forced to endure, which not only causes us to dissociate and detach from ourselves and our own souls, it makes it very hard for us to connect with other people later. And it's inhumane.
Absolutely.
So.
And in fact, maybe we can take it a step further from psychological perspective. What does it do, killing a dog? What does it do to two different kinds of people? The people who are humane and essentially good, it kills a piece of them, I would say. It destroys something internal within them, that part of compassion and sensitivity and care. It's very dangerous what it could do to us. And then what it does, it maybe promotes and encourages individuals who are more psychopathic, who enjoy aggressiveness
exactly.
and violence.
I mean, you always hear that people who are on death row or who have been murdering humans started out by torturing animals, and that should not be what we have in the curriculum for first-year medical students, because if you can kill somebody's prior pet, you know, a sweet animal in front of you, you know, how are you going to treat the homeless man in the ER? How are you going to treat the vulnerable patient who's mentally ill? You know, it's just... It makes no sense whatsoever.
You know, it reminds me of so many scenarios that I experienced on the side of being a patient and on the side of being a doctor and observing mentors. And I mean, I fully understand what you're talking about because I was in that world and I am in that world. And it's just to some extent. And there's just so many scenarios people who've gone through medical school or doctoral program have seen and experience that it's just, I don't know where I should begin. But, you know, there's a book that's called Sharks in Suits. And one thing that I love that I took from that book is that just because somebody goes into the mental health field or the psychology field or the medical field doesn't mean that they are good human beings. Doesn't mean that they have a good character. Mm-hmm. And in fact, there's a certain percent of those people who go into, especially into leadership in that area, that really are sharks. Okay, they have a suit on and they have a doctor's hat on and they have publications that have to do with medicine. But in reality, in real life, the way they function, the way they treat their students or other doctors they work with or their patients even, is like a shark.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And you know, patients, you know, will say something about that. But I wanted to go deeper maybe into the area of students. And what do we know about students and what they're going through? And what is the problem today?
Well, they are placed in a situation where they feel they have a lack of support. And, of course, they have a massive amount of material to learn, and they don't have anywhere to turn when they have, you know, mental health issues, for example, anxiety. Some medical schools don't have counselors. Those that do have counselors, sometimes it's one counselor per 600 students. You know what I mean? Mm. There's a lack of recognition that students need to be supported in their training with proper services. This isn't just kind of a regurgitation, memorization cycle. I mean, the first 2 years of medical school is very isolating for people. And so I just don't think the basic needs are being met of these highly intelligent, loving, do-gooder type people. I think they're misunderstood by society. I think that medical schools are not properly set up to really nurture them.
It's such an interesting thing to say because they do go sort of. There's one article that called it the silent epidemic, but it really is. And I think that it became more intense the more competitive schools have become, medical schools have become, and how difficult it is to get into various programs, and the increased need for your program to be rated as a great program. And so I think that's just a tremendous pressure. But you said something interesting, that there's just no place for them to go. And I think even if they had a place to go, which we really should have those. There is the other problem, and that is the perception that their friends and their mentors will have should they find out that that student is suffering from any mental health issue.
Right, which goes back to the general culture being very inhumane and just not, we don't have a nurturing culture in general. It's very competitive. It's a dog-eat-dog process. I mean, part of that is because we have, like, I think, 30,000 or so medical school graduates every year or something like that. It might be 35,000, but we have a deficit, of like 4,000 less residency slots or so, 4,000 to 5,000 less residency slots than number of students graduating. So these people are pitted against each other for a limited number of spots, and people who do not get a residency spot, they're left with $300,000 of student loans and a degree that they can't use.
It's horrible. And then they continue to the next year to compete with the new pool of people or the new influx of people who again do not have those numbers met, and the perception that maybe why didn't they get it the first time? Maybe they're not good. Maybe this and that. So they often take more on themselves to maybe enhance their resume in the hopes that they will get it the next round, which adds more financial burden, more years of their life, and more aggravation. Absolutely, it could be a very deep hole.
And more medical schools are opening, so there's more and more medical students being trained for a limited number of residency slots. And pre-medical students are not forewarned of the situation. So they walk in bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ready to save the world, and they are thrown in like a pit with one another, having to, compete with each other just for personal survival.
Yes, it's unethical.
Horrible.
It's a very unethical thing that schools do, all these different schools that pop around and promise. And by the way, this happens in psychology too. You've got so many schools of psychology, you've got a surplus of psychologists, and you don't have enough spots, training spots at all whatsoever. They fit, sometimes they fit 70%, sometimes 80%. And then in certain subfields of psychology, like neuropsychology, the situation is even worse. It's sort of like it's like a club that's very difficult to get into, and so many people want to get into it that are qualified and good and bright and capable, but they simply will not have a spot. But I want to touch again on this area that it is inhumane, and that very quickly in the medical culture or the medical community, very quickly the word gets out if somebody has anything about them that's different or any struggle that they have. I'm going to call it gossip, because that's what I saw and see a lot, an amount of gossip that is really painful. We had one intern. I was just finishing postdoc, and there was I was newly licensed, and there was one postdoc who was desperately trying to getting supervision, and I'm not sure where it all started, but the word got out that person is depressed and therefore will not do well, and the word got out that person should not be supervised, that everyone should stay away from that person like a plague. And it was an awful thing to see. It just was. That person was a very nice person, finished lots of education with really good grades, did a lot of clinical hours, finished them successfully. So I'm not sure where the buzz started, but that was, all I thought is, aren't we doctors? Aren't we supposed to care how he feels and support him, actually, because he's one of us? I don't know that we have that culture. He's one of us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really interesting. Now, what do we know about some of the statistics right now?
Well, that's the other problem, is that nobody is tracking accurately the number of suicides among physicians or medical students, which is really kind of unbelievable because they certainly are tracking who's paying their tuition. So if their tuition payment stopped, presumably something happened to that medical student. But it's like they disappeared. There is no recognition that they died. There is nobody other than I'm trying to keep track. I have 320 or so cases of complete suicides among doctors and medical students that I have collected. But certainly I shouldn't be doing this in my bedroom as a hobby. There should be some seriousness and some multiple organizations tracking these. But, that's part of the problem with this taboo topic. Nobody wants to count the bodies. And this is a public health issue because over 1 million Americans lose their physicians to suicide every year. So we cannot just pretend like this isn't happening. I mean, if this were Ebola or Zika, we would have a body count and it would be on the evening news every night.
Absolutely. But it's, not everything obviously makes the news. There was a study that was published in 2008, and it surveyed physicians in Michigan, just asking them about their work experience, if they had any depressive symptoms. And what came out, there was a higher percent for just general communication of depressive symptoms, but more than 11% of those physicians reported moderate to severe depression, which for any of us in the clinical world, moderate to severe depression is very serious. It means that it's likely to meet clinical level, which means it highly impacts, the likelihood is that it impacts their functioning, their personal functioning, maybe even their work functioning, but that they're truly, truly suffering. And as soon as they, many of them have an insurance coverage that is through their workplace or their institution. And so as soon as they reach out to those types of services, it's more likely to be known and put their position and their employment in jeopardy.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we're one of the few, I think the only occupation, constant barrage of mental health questions on every application that we fill out, whether it's to get your state licensure, to, if you were to move to another state, you have to complete that again. Every time you want to be a preferred provider for an insurance plan, they're digging into your mental health history. You're having to complete that question. Anytime you want hospital privileges, I mean, presumably you will have had to answer that mental health question more than 20 times for any particular job that you applied to as an employed physician. It's very invasive. You don't have to do this when you work at Walmart or,
right. Even for some government jobs.
It's unbelievable, the evasiveness and the stigma associated with mental health conditions in medicine. We should be the leaders. We should be demonstrating that it's okay to talk about all sorts of health issues and give people the care that they need, including our own. Why we should be punishing people for mental health conditions that are actually caused by the profession, by the stress of the profession and the training. Why is it acceptable to treat diabetes and stroke and all kinds of allergies, but it's not okay to treat a mental health condition? What is the difference? Mm-hmm. It's something that's so fundamental, and I absolutely agree with you. But unfortunately, higher up individuals in leadership may use that type of information against doctors who are less established. So that's why a friend of mine drives 200 miles out of town and pays cash using a fake name to get mental health care, and she's an awesome psychiatrist. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Does that make any sense that we're having to sneak around? I mean, what if we had to sneak outside of town and pay cash for our own colonoscopies? I mean, how many people would be getting colonoscopies at that rate? We need to make these services accessible and on the job. Mm-hmm. I have several patients who do the same. They're adamant about paying cash. They don't have to drive far, thankfully, but they're adamant about paying cash, and they, want to make sure that the information is secure, that no one knows about it, and it's so sad because, of course, then they relax knowing that everything is fine, but and their information is safe.
But just knowing what they would go through, and also the sense of self-deprecation. And I want to talk about that because when you are emotionally fragile and you feel vulnerable, you often start doubting your own ability to function and your own ability to be good at what you do and your own value. And I think that's something that so many of them suffer from. They compare themselves to something that's unrealistic.
Yeah, and they look around and they see that everyone else seems to be functioning okay, so they believe they're the only one that's suffering, when in fact, if we were to talk about this like we are on your show, everyone would come to realize they're not alone.
Mm-hmm. And I want to share, this is a good time to share something I haven't shared before on the show. Since I started doing the show, some very interesting things started happening and some amazing things. One of them is the show is universal, so it goes online and all kinds of listeners listen, and a certain percent of them are doctors. And I started receiving emails and communications from doctors who are higher up, who are chiefs of departments and or long-time professors or long-time clinicians who do amazing at their job, but are significantly unhappy, very, very miserable with the way their life turned out to be, particularly the medical community and how the medical community operates, just what you're saying, exactly what you're saying. How the level of stress, toxic relationships and toxic experiences, and how tired they become from that. And sometimes how it affected, and that's inevitable, I feel, in so many cases, how it eventually affected other areas of their life. Because if they have to sacrifice so much of themselves and compete in an irrational way for the job that they desire, it eventually will affect their relationships outside of the job. Whether they get married or not, whether they have children, whether they're able to maintain their marriage and care for their kids. All of that is directly linked to that. And I find that it's just not discussed.
Yeah, it's not discussed. And the thing is that we will graduate, many of us, just from our medical training with serious mental health issues, including PTSD. I don't know if you've seen my recent blog here, but I couldn't believe that. I mean, I've never been in the military, so I can only surmise what it's like. But a medical student wrote me and told me she was less stressed in Afghanistan, in a war zone under sniper fire, than medical school.
Mm-hmm. Every little deviation from the perfection that they expect is going to throw a person, a student, into a state of tremendous anxiety and turmoil. And that's part of what you experience with PTSD later. It becomes a physiological reaction to a perceived threat. And that threat does not need to be the threat for your life. It's a perceived threat to your existence. And if you spend so many years sacrificing so many years of your life becoming a doctor, becoming that individual that is idealized and supposed to be, the healer and savior to people, and then you are being made to feel that by being human and having your own deviations, you are incapable of being that leader for people. That's going to throw somebody off emotionally and psychologically very quickly. PTSD is one of my areas of expertise, and I will tell you that absolutely one can develop PTSD from, being in an environment that they feel a sense of threat to their own self and existence, that they've been humiliated or attacked and they never know when it's going to happen. They're being deprived from sleep and nutrition and social connection and relationships. And I can go on and on and on, all to get the categories that we often see with somebody who's suffering from PTSD. And so I think we have to keep our mind open that different experiences can create that same exact reaction. And it sometimes can take years before the person can recover.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is the case for even the first chapter in my book. I actually published a book called Suicide Letters, which is just the letters that I've received from suicidal physicians over the years. And it's amazing to me, but I'll just share with you. This is a woman who is a retired surgeon, and she writes that thank you so much for the truths you speak. For so many, many times in my years of medicine, I have said to trusted friends and several therapists, something happened to me in med school. I was happy, secure, and mostly unafraid until med school. I recall in vivid detail the first orientation day. Our anatomy professor stood before an auditorium filled with 125 eager, nervous, idealistic would-be healers and said these words: "If you decide to commit suicide, do it right so you do not become a burden to society."
Oh.
He then describes in anatomical detail how to commit suicide. And I get letters from people who have had, methods described to them. If you can't keep up and you're thinking of dying by suicide, here's the instruction for that, and they're giving this information to these vulnerable people who are just, they're students who are these 20-year-old, 19-year-old, idealistic, sweet humanitarians who are getting instructed in their own suicide. Isn't that horrible?
It's horrible. And I was exposed to one story where a young postdoc was told by a chief, and I'm in the area of neuropsychology that has a lot of psychology in it, okay, a lot of mental health, and was told by a chief, don't have children, it will ruin your career. When the person was contemplating getting married and having kids, that is not a normal thing to say for somebody who's supposed to be in the field of well-being, for somebody who's supposed to understand the importance of, we are mammals. It's as essential as it comes. Families, relationships, being soothed by, developing a life and understanding that whole idea of work-life balance, which I laugh when I hear. Because we talk about that in businesses, and we talk about that in institutions, and we talk about the idea, okay, of work-life balance, but we are so far away from what it truly actually means.
Yeah, and if you've had your human rights violated chronically for 5, 6, 7+ years of medical training, and somebody comes in and tells you to have work-life balance, I mean, your body is having the reaction of being, almost like in a refugee or concentration camp. It's not, exactly the same on the surface. You can look normal, but the actual physiologic experience of fear, of sustained fear, that you're going through, and lack of nutrition, lack of sleep, overwork. This is very similar to other people who are in war zones and concentration camps, and so it's like, the end, this woman, when I finally explained to her that she wasn't the only one, the one that I just read you this letter from, she said, thank you again for the work you do. I really think that connecting with you has helped me to realize it is not just me. There is nothing wrong with me. We have been traumatized.
Yes, absolutely. And it's just knowing that there's other people that understand what you feel. I have one doctor that reached out to me from Europe, and he's many years older than I am and has been in the medicine field for a long time. And he described in pain the toxic relationships, in his department and in his environment, trying to make sense of that, and then trying to make sense overall of his life and the time that he spent as a doctor. And while he had lots of accomplishments on paper, the sense of self-misery, internal misery because of those toxic relationships was cutting many pieces out of him. And, when he communicated only later on, now I was very supportive, sharing with him that so many of us feel that way, that so many of us are silent about it, but it exists, and that we have to rise above it. And we talked about toxic relationships. And it was very helpful to him, like you said, to know that we know, and that it is going on, but we have to triumph over it. But then he communicated that he has a medical condition. that he does not know the length of his life. And, when you hear those things, when you hear that somebody suffers quietly so much, and they are in the field that's supposed to be the field of healing, and they're not able to get the help that they need, that is profound. That is one of some of the most amazing hypocrisies out there. And so I think it's important to open it up. You mentioned the woman that wrote to you, and it's wonderful you were there for her. I'll tell you from experience of veterans, who one of the areas of my work for several years are veterans come back from combat from Afghanistan and Iraq, and a good % of them is suicidal, and as there's a high number of them that does commit suicide. Even just having someone to talk to, someone they can go to in times of need. And we know in the study of suicide that sometimes a person many times will change their opinion about suicide, but it's that moment that they feel that way that they need somebody to reach out to so they can put themselves back together to be able to move forward. We need to be able to have that open in a non-judgmental way. And the issue is that right now, it would be going under scrutiny, and there would be, even if you open the door for something like that, unless it's fully confidential and free of judgment, students and doctors will be less likely to reach out for help, particularly with women. And I wanted to ask you your professional and opinion on the issue of women doctors, because an interesting study was covered a year ago. I went to one of the lectures that covered the study that talks about more than 70% of female doctors were clinically depressed.
Yeah, well, I think it's very hard on women to be in a profession that's basically a patriarchal medical model, and it does not respect women and women's nurturing tendencies, that our unique skill set to our gender, it is not honored, as well as kind of the male, tough, callous, militaristic type, model. And so we are left to, if we want to succeed in the patriarchal reductionist medical model, we have to be like masculinized women. So you might notice women in medicine are kind of talking tough and walking around with all their charts and graphs and using the same terminology that tough guy men use, and they're not like feminine, loving, nurturing, women. Mm-hmm. They are a male version of a woman.
And I find that actually women to women could be quite harmful. I had 3 babies in 5 years during the PhD program. Mm-hmm. My male mentors, I happened to have really good mentors through the program, were very supportive. They allowed me to bring the baby and breastfeed the baby. I was in full-time internship. I would run to the parking lot to see grandma with the baby, breastfeed the baby, run back into my internship. We did all sorts of things to make it happen, and it was extremely difficult. But I must say, when I received tremendous push against and criticism for trying to do both at the same time, it was mostly from females. It wasn't from males. Mm-hmm. And I think that we have a responsibility also as women, and maybe we were trained to do that. I don't know. Maybe women were trained to be tough on each other. Maybe because this way we are identifying with the male role in medicine. I don't know. But I found that very surprising. And I found out that we need to work together if we really want to succeed in changing a culture and being accepted as a strong woman, not a woman that acts like a man. We need to work together, and we need to allow for those opportunities to be accepted and to occur. And like you said, that was interesting what you said, because I haven't thought about this before. And that's, what we bring to the table from a female perspective, the style of writing, the style of caring for our patients, how we report information. I find that a very interesting point.
Yeah, well, if you listen to what patients really want when they go to the doctor, what they're lacking is the doctor didn't make eye contact with me, didn't seem like they care, the doctor didn't connect with me. These are very female nurturing relational traits that we naturally have as women. And so that's what people are missing is the sweet female energy, loving, caring energy of women, which we naturally bring on the first day of medical school, and it is beaten out of us.
It's so interesting you're saying that, because I have a tendency to say be well or blessings, either at the end of an email or when I talk to people or patients. And I never really knew if it makes an impact or not until one husband of a woman a wonderful woman who's declining because of dementia pretty rapidly. The next time I saw them, he said, every time you leave your message, you say blessings at the end. And I just need to hear that. And I go, and I'm thinking, wow, had I known that, I probably would be saying it more. I would be noticing to even say it more often. But that simple thing where you could send a blessing somebody's way or wish them well, the power of wishing good for another person, that's not something we are taught to do.
Right. Yeah, and I even tell my patients I love them and sign my emails love, and and that's how patients relate to me. And so is that breaking any kind of a rule? I mean, I believe personally in professional closeness. I don't really subscribe to professional distance. I want to be close to my patients in a professional way, and that is what I do. I love them like I love a child, like I love, an aunt or uncle. I should not feel like I have to close my heart and soul to my patients and not connect with them to be a professional doctor.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think, what is a professional doctor? That's by itself an interesting question. Isn't it in our profession, like we said, to not just do no harm, but do the best we can to care for our patients? So being professional, who says being professional means to be cold? You're not getting much done with someone if you're being cold and non-supportive or judgmental. And I think that's one of the top complaints that I saw that patients have about doctors, that they felt the doctor was judging them or dismissing the way they were feeling. So what you're saying is very important. I also think when you give diagnosis to someone, I've heard more than once about how individuals felt when they received a serious diagnosis in a rather cold and inhumane way. And they were left with, well, now what?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's all of that would be just such a wonderful way of getting training out there done. But what I wanted to do is now touch a little bit on your books, because the time passes by really fast. I'm on your website now. We're showing it on air. We've got, so the first book was Pet Goats and Pep Smears. So tell us a little bit about this book. It's a really cool picture, by the way.
Yeah, the picture is not photoshopped. That's actually a goat in my office and a third-year medical student who's volunteered to be in the picture. And basically this book is essentially a chicken soup for the soul type book for physicians and medical students and even patients. It just shows the fun side of medicine, the joy of practicing medicine, and how we could be relating to each other during our office visits. So it's got cartoons in every chapter, and it's actually just a fun, quick read.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of fun, and I think we all need a laugh and a smile and just relaxation. That's absolutely just to have a good, comfortable time. Now, what about physician suicide letters? What is that about?
That is about the suicide letters that I've been answering for the past 4 years. Physicians have been calling and writing me, and I have been counseling them and helping walk them off the edge where they are having just extreme suffering and nobody to help them. And so this is almost like a print version of a physician suicide hotline. And so it's actually a very uplifting book, even though it's very difficult to read. I mean, it is 53 chapters, and 6 of the people in there have died. The rest are alive and have come back to practicing medicine, many of them. And so it's, again, just sort of it's an uplifting book through the darkness. other people's real life tragedies.
Well, I always like to say life is bittersweet, and it's always going to be bittersweet. And that's what you're saying. This is very interesting. So did you ever feel like, well, first of all, how did they know about you? How did they know to reach out to you?
I started writing about physician suicide 4 years ago on my blog and just telling my true story of being a suicidal physician. And after I shared that, I got so many emails and letters and phone calls from physicians all over the world who really felt like they were the only ones. And so I think through sharing my story, I gave them permission to share their stories.
That's wonderful. And did you ever feel that there was a time you weren't able to help someone?
Well, there are people who are not really asking for help necessarily, or they feel like they can't be helped. I had one woman call me, and I didn't know who she was. She called from like an unknown number, and all she did is cry the entire time on the phone, so I still don't know who she is and whether she's alive. Hopefully talking to me and listening to me, give her sort of my story of coming back to the surface. Hopefully that helped her, but I have no way to know because I don't know what happened to her and I don't even know who she is. So
right.
By the time people reach out to me, often they really do want help. They don't always believe that they can be helped, but it's a good sign that they're reaching out.
It's interesting you're saying that because research shows that when people, threaten that they're going to do suicide, it all has to be taken seriously, and you can't dismiss those threats saying, well, they're never going to do that. Because first of all, a good % of them does end up committing suicide or attempting to commit suicide. And secondly, many times suicidal events can be prevented. A full completion of suicide can be prevented just by having someone there to intervene.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting that I posted something that I had written. It was actually a lecture that I gave at a medical school called How to Graduate Medical School Without Killing Yourself. And this gentleman wrote me, a medical student wrote me, he was actually in the midst of a suicide attempt when this popped up on his Facebook page, and he watched my lecture and decided not to complete his suicide.
Wow. That is amazing.
Sometimes it can just be an article that you read just right at the right moment that can help you through. And one other thing I just wanted to mention in general, since suicide is such a taboo topic and we have so much trouble even talking about it, sometimes we use phrases that are also continue to stigmatize the topic of suicide. And one is this whole notion of committing suicide, which is kind of antiquated phraseology that makes it feel like a crime. So it's really better, and not a lot of people know this, but if we can just start saying died by suicide or died of suicide, just like you would say died of pneumonia or died in a car accident, versus committed. So
yeah, and the terminology is difficult. It's something that's definitely ingrained in the system. But I think that the whole area needs to be, in general, mental health is something that's still a taboo, and we need to destigmatize it and allow people to have a human experience and go through life with their ups and downs. And be supported through it. I love your story about the article that just popped while he was in this state, and how important that is, that we don't even know that one thing that we do can lead directly into significantly impacting somebody's life. And it can go both ways, right? If a professor or a mentor says to you, this is terrible, you should never become a doctor or anything like that, that could throw somebody off the other way.
Or if your professor welcomes you to medical school with instructions for how to die by suicide, that can lead you in that direction. If
right,
you read
give
an
you
article
instructions
that talks about how to prevent suicide, then, people going into medicine are quite young. They're like 20 years old. They're very, they're in a time in their life when they're just learning about these things. And to have somebody in a power position
yes.
present information like this is so dangerous.
They're very impressionable. It's
That's
like
the
children.
word I was looking for.
Yeah, very impressionable. And you're right, absolutely. How easy it is they're malleable, their mind is changing, and they design their life, and they look up to the leaders in the field like they're gods in a way, and how dangerous that is. So absolutely. You're raising so many wonderful points. I think your work is incredible. It's just God sent. See, I can mention God, and that's okay. But it's such a wonderful thing to do, to provide that. And I really hope you're going to get more, you have incredible exposure, but I believe that this area can't get enough exposure until we start making some real changes. And I think that's so wonderful what you're doing. We're going to post right now your website link where people can reach you. And any other way that you wish for individuals to reach out to you, or any services that you offer in that area that we should know about?
Well, I return every single phone call and email that I get, so feel free to. The best way to reach me is through idealmedicalcare.org, my website, just a little contact page there. And then if you are a physician or a medical student who is suffering and you need help, you are totally welcome to join our teleseminar, come to the retreats that I offer. I mean, there are many different resources that I have for you, but the important thing is to just reach out and ask for help.
Well, I just became a fan, I must say. And I hope individuals will continue to do that and reach out for help. Again, with that in mind, I really, really thank you for being on the show and with us and educating our listeners. And now we're posting the Dr. Dee Show page. All of you listeners know where to find me. You know where to listen to the episodes. We are now on iHeart, Stitcher, iTunes, Facebook. We are rapidly growing and going into other levels of exposure. If you wanted to book a particular session, if you wanted to find out more information in a particular area, you can reach out to me and I will do my best to send you to the right place. Any topics that are on your mind that you feel should be explored, that you want me to bring an expert on board to speak about, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Contact at drdeegaines.com. Contact at drdeegaines.com. And with that in mind, I wish all of you to have a healthy, internally and externally healthy experience in the next week, and hopefully you will join us next time. Be well.
You're listening to the Dr. Dee Show about neuropsychology and well-being. Get the knowledge you must have to live a powerful, positive life. The Dr. Dee Show. Here for you.